We operated for nearly 60 years, and we closed in 1994. That was when everything was changing. There was Walmarts and Sam's and Costco's, and all those people had their own produce. In 2001, my brother, December of 2001, my brother wrote an article to the letter to the editor, which they picked up on and got pictures to go with it and made a full-page article in the paper. And it was called The Landmarks That Preceded the Art Center or the Carson Center, looking back when produce ruled 2nd Street. I'm going to, at that same time, I went down when the art center was right, coming on. They were starting to buy property. It was a reality. They had gotten financing. And so I went down and started taking pictures of all the businesses and buildings and stuff were down there, because I thought today, somebody would, well, what was down there? What was there? And so with Roy's help, he has gone down and found kind of where I was standing when I took the pictures, and he took today's picture. So some of these pictures are going to be today, and some are going to be the way it was. So we'll do that after I read this article that my brother wrote. When McCartney Produce and Paducah Hide and Junk ceased operations earlier this year, it was the end of once a vibrant and unique section of Paducah. Although even in its heyday, it was unfamiliar to the average citizen. A study of old city directories showed for over 100 years, last summer, there was one or more wholesale produce dealers in the 2-block avenue from Kentucky Avenue to Clark Street, a stretch once known by many persons to the citizens of Paducah as Pistol Avenue. Barger and Golightly, Peck Brothers, J.K. Exall, Holly Hopkins, Yop Seed Company, Allen Produce were just a few of the better remembered. Because most of the businesses were wholesalers, most people did not often venture into that corner of the city. And when they did, they were usually disconnected by the rough brick streets littered with pieces of decaying fruit and usually blocked by trucks unloading produce. Volatile produce business are driven almost exclusively by supply and demand, and was affected by price fluctuations and inherent to the products. Perhaps for that reason, it seemed to attract one or more flamboyant, reckless, and boisterous nature people rather than businesses like clothing and hardware. On one occasion, an owner of the produce house, one of the produce houses, not one I mentioned, under the influence of alcohol, ran his car into the river at the foot of Broadway. Another time came it was under suspicion when one of the wholesale houses burned down right after Christmas because the building was full of Christmas fruit that hadn't sold. Despite all these enemies, no industry had higher ethics than the produce industry. Through the years, it is until the present day, thousands of perishable products are shipped across the country, accepted and paid for by the collection, except for the people with good standing. I could buy $10,000 to $15,000 carload of apples in Washington, D.C. Just talk to the man, and he'd look up, and we had a produce rating, and he'd look at our name and say, y'all had 4X trading members, y'all, and he'd just ship me the apples and send me an invoice. Now, not many people would put that trust in people. The 2-block stretch anchored by Market House and Finkel's Department Store on the north and Clark on in the street on the east of the riverside was mostly wholesale houses, their backs to the railroad. The west side was the home of the city scale yard, the junkyard, that's Baskin's, various cafes, Ball's Brokerage, and wagon yards where farmers left their rigs when they came to town to trade. Between 2nd and 3rd Street and Washington Adams was a public team tracks with the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad, where over thousands of cars of fruits and vegetables were unloaded. But because of the unique combination of location, favorable freight rates, aggressive brokers, and produce wholesalers from over 200-mile radius sent their trucks several times a week to receive merchandise from the refrigerated cars. We were in the Illinois tariff, railroad tariff. And when you cross the river, it was a lot higher tariff, so we could get better, we could sell people from down in Tennessee and Alabama and all. The operation was little known to most local residents, but growers and shippers from all over the nation were well aware that except for some large metropolitan areas, Paducah was one of the largest produce markets in the country. We were once called the biggest little market in the country. South 2nd Street was a street of odors, the earthly smell of potatoes in burlap bags, the fragrant scent of oranges, the musty odor of melons, the tropical scent of bananas, and the pungent whiff of onions, all overlaid with the sweet smell of hot sugar and flavoring from Gillum Candy Company. Gillum burned in a big downtown fire in 1969. Further down the street was Yops, where there was the smell of seeds, plants, and fertilizer, and it was overpowered by the rancid stench of fish bait because they stored fish bait in the basement of their coffers, and they also had cheese, rancid cheese they sold to the commercial fishermen. It was also common knowledge, unspoken knowledge, that the firm once did a steady business in gallon jugs and 100-pound bags of sugar to certain residents of the between the river people. The curb in front of the market house was occupied daily by an assortment of citizens known as lumpers or swampers, who were available for temporary labor such as unloading trucks or rail cars. Some of them were admittedly winos looking to get a price for a drink or a cheap hooch from the Red Fox, the big Kentucky Tavern, the little Kentucky Tavern, or all the other bars located between 2nd Street and the river. An area known to the police by the police department as the lower end. You could hear over the radio, we got a fight in the lower end, so the police knew where to go. Others were simply willing workers without a regular job who were trying to get the price of a meal for themselves or their families. Most of these curb sitters or lumpers had colorful names: Big Boy Hines, Dynamite, Spud, Happy Jack, Barnyard Boogie, Mercy, Ham Red, and Buzz were only a few. There was always a stir of anticipation when the shipping clerk would bargain go lightly, or Peck would approach the crowd to pick out the most likely looking ones and the ones that were sober to unload a newly arrived refrigerated carload of bananas. Bananas then came in log stalks and were hung in the railroad cars. Those selected would form a line into the car which is spotted on the track near the rear Barger or Peck. One by one, they would enter the car, receive a heavy stalk of green fruit on their shoulder, and carry it to the cooler, where it was hung and gassed. That's another art, was to ripen bananas. When it was, sometimes there was excitement when one of the laborers would inadvertently discover a tarantula that had hitchhiked from Central America on a stalk of bananas. They would go to dancing and really get excited. Saturday, unlike the present, was another day a week, but made more interesting by the influx of farmers and other traders. There was always a sidewalk preacher on the corner in front of Finkel's, exhorting the crowd. Across the street in front of the Red Box was a group of men swapping watches, pocket knives, guns, hound dogs, and an assortment of other merchandise, probably a predecessor to today's flea market. Although the corner grocery store disappeared over 50 years ago, the wholesalers on 2nd Street remained valuable for a number of years. Most of the supermarkets were replaced to smaller stores and remained locally owned, and were most of the restaurants and cafeterias, and certainly doing business with local suppliers. When my father came here in 1930, he said there was 52 corner grocery stores in Paducah. Back then, people didn't have many cars, and people walked to the shops to work, and they walked to the corner or 2 blocks down and got their groceries on time, and there wasn't many cars. But you can imagine that now we got all the part of the heyday during our time was when we had Farmers Market, and Biggs, and Hancock's, and Bob Nolan's, and a lot of the big supermarkets that were very competitive with each other. There was always a sidewalk preacher in the corner of Finkel's. Although the corner grocery store visited over 50 years ago, the wholesalers on 2nd Street remained for a number of years. As time went on, however, the local retail owners went out of business and were absorbed by the larger chains. The chains and volunteer groups had unlimited funds and buying power, and utilized their Maggie distribution centers to carry a full line of food supplies. When those big chains would take you over, they said you got to buy everything. They got their meat, their canned goods, and produce and everything from them. So they said that was in the contract. They had to buy everything from them. Bargain Goatlotty went out of business in 1977 after 71 years on 2nd Street. Yop also closed its doors about the same time. A few years later, Peck Brothers sold out to McCartney Produce, a big wholesaler in Paris, Tennessee, and then they were here for a few years, and they moved their business to Paris. Peck was a member of the firm that had brothers Randall and Nez and when Nez and Lane returned from World War II, where he had been in the Air Force and a prisoner of war in Germany, he decided to return to college and got his law degree and accounting degree. And he came back and went in business as a lawyer and accountant here in Paducah. Finkel's closed a few years back, a victim of the mall and changing times. But the railroad in Paducah was a big distributor. Progress is desirable, change is inevitable. But the Ford River Center is now a reality. We can go to the Ford River Center now and see Broadway shows, plays. The Telethon of Stars was there for many years. the Symphony place there. It's a beautiful building, a great addition to Paducah. Let me now show you some pictures of this area, and we'll kind of talk about what we're going. All right, well, there's the freight house, where, you know, the Commerce Center now. This is all the area where the Ford River Center is. Of course, here's the flood wall. This is when Marine Wave was that was another big business at that time. It was Marine Wave. You can see all the boats on dry docks. Paducah Water Works was here. This is Washington Street, and of course the City Hall. This is Clark Street, but right in here is where all the Carson Center is. Next. All right, this is an 1885 Severn match. This is when the Market House was small. The Market House was called Market Street, 2nd Street, 2 Street. They had different names there. And this is all the business on each side of the thing. It didn't go all the way to the corner. It was small at first, the first one. Next. All right, there it is. It was small. The courthouse, the first courthouse, was on Second and Kentucky. And before the courthouse, in 1913, I think it was, they built the first fire place there. There was cost them $300. It was just a wooden building. There was a pull car thing for go to fight fires in Paducah. But that was the first courthouse was on 2nd Street. Next. All right, now here are the different things. They used to have a couple beautiful cupola on top of the thing. This is one end of the bins, and that's that's where the Yiser is on Broadway. This is Broadway, and this is Broadway right here, and Kentucky Avenue, and then that's the other end where the theater is. And there's the theater today with the trees growing up around it. And this is inside of the Market House where the rector had meat places here. And you can look, that was in the center of the Market House. The rector lived down on Blandford Road and raised a lot of his own cattle and hogs for meat. But that was in the center of the center stall in the Market House. Next. There's looking towards Finkel Street, an old car, and that was, there were hardware stores and all kinds of things, but that's Finkel's, which is still there. Okay, next. There it is today, and earlier it was all this was open, and the farmers would come down with their wagons and just back into to the side of it, and they would unhook their horses and kind of pat them on the butt, and they would walk down to the stables because they knew they were going to get fed and watered, and they'd go down to the stables and stay there all day. And when he got through his business, he'd go get his horses and hook them back up. Next. All right, now that's looking south on 2nd Street. There was when there's Peck Brothers, which was later McCartney, and Bargain Golightly. Holly Hopkins was on this corner. Allen Produce was in here. The big Kentucky and the little Kentucky were down here. And this is right here. That's the Market House, the corner of the Market House. And down there is the Railroad Museum. All right, well, there it is today, looking from the same way. Yeah, look at the difference. You can see all those were brick streets. There were brick streets everywhere then. And there's the early picture of the Market House where you can see the horses and the buggy. They'd back them in there. And there's the Senate Hotel and the open Market House. That's 1850 Market House. Next. There it is today, looking down with all the trees and the beautiful things. There's again another. This corner It's been many things, grocery stores, Red Fox Tavern, and all 2nd Street and Market House. Okay. And there it is today. That's the end where and these are the lumpers and that we called them, or they were looking for work, and they were hanging out there all day. If you couldn't find them here, I could go to the back of the Red Fox. That was a Red Fox Inn, and they were hanging out in the back of the Red Fox. This is when it was a grocery store, I think. But they were always looking for work, and there it is today, with on the end where the theater is. And alley music is down here, and it's changed. This has changed hands several different times. There's some more of the lumpers working, looking for work. There it is today, looking at the theater, where you go into the theater. The theater box office is over here. There's 2nd Street in the 1913 flood. Look at all the wholesalers. This is when it was in its heydays. Yop was down in here, but these are different wholesalers that were open in the 1930s. They're backing in their wagon trying to get some of their stuff. People in their boats. It was a busy place for produce and seed houses. There's looking today for the Carson Center. A lot of change. And there's the 1937 flood with it was a different name then, but that's when it was a livestock place, and that's Finkel's now. There's the same shot today. The parking lot. There's a parking lot for the Ford River or the Carson Center, Finkel's, the box office. Okay. And there's a picture when Peck was in here. Bargain Go Light was in this building. And before this, Holly Hopkins was on the corner, and then it was Allen Produce. And right in here is where the candy kitchen was. Gilliam, it burned, and you can see part of the building was torn down. This is Elliott Baskin. Baskin's had the junkyard across the street. That's Elliott Baskin standing in the street. There's the same view today, the front of the Carson Center, the River Discovery Training Center is there, and that's the box office for the Market House. See, progress, moving on. There again is a picture of McCartney, kind of at a different angle, which was Peck Brothers, and across the street in Finkel's. The Finkel's building's basically the same now. They've torn this off and made a new back entrance to the theater. The theater owns that now. There it is with where they're building the new back entrance to the theater. They have plays and stuff in there. That is the 1937 when that was the corner of 2nd. This is Kentucky. This is 2nd Street. That was H&L Produce, and it burned. And that wall fell on Chief Wood and injured him and another fireman real seriously. And they took Chief Wood to Riverside Hospital because of his injuries. And then the flood came up. They evacuated him in a boat, and he later died from his injury. But that was the wall that fell on him. And there's where Exall Produce and then Peck Brothers and Go Lightly, but that's looking down that direction. And there it is today. This is Bargain Golightly. They started out in business down about where Kirchhoff's is, and that's one of their labels. But that's Mr. Barger and Mr. Golightly. There's one of the stalks of bananas I was talking about, and they've got outgrew that place and moved down a block to the other one I was showing you. Okay. There's where they were then. There's another one of the little buildings on 2nd Street. And there's Yop, the famous Yops. And all this was Yops at one time. They rented some of these buildings to somebody else, Hawkins Wholesale for a while. But this was the heyday of Yop Seed Company. This is 2nd Street. This is 2nd Street and this is Kentucky Avenue. Washington, yeah, Washington. That's Washington. This is 2nd Street. Okay. There's the same thing today. Progress. And there's Yops with them unloading feed or potatoes or something. And Ball's was across the street. Ball's Brokerage was across the street. And this is 2nd Street. And that's one end of the north end of Yop Seed Company near Washington Street. And there's the picture today. This is Ball's today, and that is owned by the Carson Center, and they use it for storage and use it quite often for storing stuff. And across the street is the P&L Railroad office. And back before that, there was a stock pen over there, and you couldn't keep cattle in the cars for so long, and the railroad would bring carloads of cattle and unload it in a stock pen that was there, and water them and feed them, load them back on the cars and ship them out. But most people don't remember that. I remember seeing the cattle field over here one time, once or twice. And on that side of the street is Crounce. Okay. Yeah, there's Yop and Balls, and Balls today in the P&L office over here. And there was back when it had Balls could unload at this dock or this dock, and that's the freight house where the Commerce Center is. That end of the building is where the restaurant is, freight house restaurant is. There it is today. And this here, that's where the Railroad Museum. That was originally Riley Wholesale, then it was GE Wholesale, and it was two more different other wholesales, and then it was a wholesale florist before the city bought it for the Full River Center, and all the contractors worked out of that building. They all had offices and desks and stuff in there. There's another picture of Balls today, and part of the Carson parking lot. There's back and there, yeah, you can see another picture of P&I Railroad. Real beautiful building. And there's Paducah Hide and Junk, and the scales was down behind here, and that was they had over there behind the freight highway, behind where the Railroad Museum is now. They had a big ramp, and they would load all their junk. I called it junk, and he called it material, and they'd back it up the ramp and dump it into railroad cars to ship it out. That's how they got rid of the stuff. But you can see all the junk packed up. Elliott and Nat Baskins, they were great guys. And there's where it is today. And back here, that's Vaughn and Wallace. When I was in business, this was Vaughn and Wallace. It's a lumber place that makes all kinds of fancy lumber stuff now. But that was a Studebaker dealership at one time. Big difference, big difference. There's, better looking, that's Don's Lunch. That was a real popular place to eat. It wasn't very big, but people from Metzger, that's another thing. Metzger was in business down about 2 blocks. And, you know, they processed meat, and we'd see truckloads of hogs go by our office. We were in the freight house, you know, several times a week. If you didn't see them, you could smell them. And you know, they'd take their hogs down there. But everybody came here to eat during lunch. And you had to kind of stand in line to get in. There it is, the famous spot today in the Vaughn and Wallace building, which is the cabinet people will make wood products now. There's this building was, I will say it was several things. Railroad Museum in there now, but they sold furniture. They sold GE wholesale. It was big there for years and had all their wholesale house there. There's Yop again across the street, and it was a wholesale florist. It has been several different things, but we have a railroad museum there. It belongs to the Carson Center, but they're letting us use it until they deed it. But you can see that's when it was GE. And there's the freight house over there. There's another picture. This is when the wholesale florist was in there. These were all compressors. He had refrigerated, you know, cooler rooms all over the building where he kept all the flowers that came in there. And back that up a minute. Well, here was where Baskin had his ramp, was right in here, and he'd back in there and dump his stuff in the railroad cars. Okay. There's today's picture of the back. That's the back entrance to the railroad museum. There's the freight house. And that's the when the building was built in 1925, the NC in St. L. And this is the offices. When they built this, they thought they were going to bring all their offices here for the NC in St. L. Once they got it built, it was built by the International Chattanooga and St. Louis Railroad. But after they got it built, they decided not to move some of the offices, so they were set to rent this whole top floor to the Kentucky Highway Department. That was before they were in Reedland, but they were up there for years. That's the corner where the post office is. This is Washington Street. This is 3rd Street, and there was Helms Hatchery right across the street. That was a real popular place. And there's, looking at where it is today, that's the post office, and that's the corner the place was on. That's the back end of the post office. There's the freight house, the restaurant standing down in. This is when the antique, when my brother and I, when the rail service started getting, was good, but the truck, when we got the interstate system came in, everybody wanted all their produce by truck, wanted it dropped at their place. And so the railroad business dropped off completely. And my brother and I and Bill Backus bought this building because we were renting space in here. And then we redid the building, put a new roof on it, repainted it. And we operated our business out of here for many years. And then when we retired, we sold it to Paducah Antique Mall, and that's the entrance to the Antique Mall. That whole building was an Antique Mall then. Okay. There's another picture of it. That's when it's the Carson Center, and you can see that's the Carson. I mean the freight house is, you know, and that's the back of the freight house. There's rail cars. We use these for refrigerated stores. They had mechanical units in them, and we wired them into the building, and we kept all, you know, produce in these cars. Then this is the bumper post where the cars. There were 6 tracks across here, and there would be full of rail car, mostly produce. There was 1,000 cars of produce came through Paducah a year. You wouldn't believe that, but this was a real produce center then. Okay. There it is today. And that, I'll say, the Commerce Center is one end, and down at the other end is the Freight House, Freight House Restaurant, which was a very popular restaurant. And this was a platform which was behind the Freight House. There's the Freight House. And Armour Meat Company spotted meat cars behind this, and they'd bring their meat trucks in early in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and back them up to the platform, and then they'd load their trucks for delivery and out of the cars. And of course, we used it we spot produce cars back there and load trucks out off the platform. And another thing, people don't even remember, and I can't remember much about it, but in the 50s, the National Guard in Paducah was mobilized, and the railroad brought empty flat cars down here, and they had them all along here, and they kept a switch engine down here, and they rode, that's a ramp on this end, and they brought tanks and all the military trucks and cars, and brought them down here and loaded them onto those flat cars. And they took a whole train, a load of military trucks and tanks and stuff out of Paducah. That was an exciting time for Paducah. Okay. There's a saved day today. This is where that's the parking lot and the back entrance to the Commerce Center. And that's looking down the team tracks. There's the Freight House, there's restaurants in here. And there were 6 sets of tracks all the way across here this was one behind this building. There's a track right there, and there's 3 tracks on this side and more. But this is where we loaded the produce. People came from 200 miles away to load produce out of railroad cars on this team track. Okay. There it is today, the parking lot and Ball's building, which is storage. And that's Clark Street. Back then, you can see the rails. Back then, the Clark Street didn't come through because of the team track. But now today, that's Reynolds Monument Company, and at that time they got monuments in by rail car, had a big crane and set them off, and then they cut the names and everything in them. And they don't do that anymore; they do it someplace else. But that was a monument company. There is still a monument company there today. Okay. There it is today with the restaurant. And there's the pawn shop across the street, and there's the monument company right here on this corner. And there's 2nd Street or Kentucky Avenue, which we call Maiden Alley. There you would go up that alley to the cinema today. But this was the way it was. There was produce people all along this street selling their produce. That's Mrs. Sam Jackson. The Jacksons ran Jackson Foundry, which on 2nd Street in Kentucky, and made all those steel, iron pieces between buildings that Paducah's famous for. But and there it is today. That's going back to the cinema. And there, I say there. Now this is the same, looking the same way from another. This was there was produce people all along there with their trucks backed up. There's Finkel's, there was Holly Hopkins, the Big Kentucky and the Little Kentucky, and there was another bar in here too. But this was they're all brick streets then. There's looking the same direction now. That's the Market House Theater offices in there, and Finkel's. And there's 2nd Street again. There's Finkel's. But this was on a Saturday morning. This was a busy, busy place. These people, you can see how crowded all these people, all these trucks and all their stuff. And people came from everywhere to go shopping on 2nd Street to pick up their fresh fruits and vegetables. There was an international dealer right there. I remember when they sold international trucks and international farm equipment out of that building. All this is, the Market House owns that 1897 restaurant. It's right down there. There's looking at the same direction today. And this is Paducah Water Works, and this is 1st Street. And you can see they came down Kentucky and then went up this way. These were cars and stuff that they backed in and sold all kinds of stuff, you know, that they made and grew. And that's what say Paducah Water Works. And Paducah Water Works at this time they didn't have gas, so they brought in train loads or car loads of coal and dumped it behind the building, and all the boilers and everything that boiled our water at that time was fired by coal. And those tracks came from the IC. This behind this building, behind Peck and Golightly, is the IC Railroad, and they came over from 6th and Capitol. If you remember, they came through Barclay Park, came down right along the flood wall, and went up 2nd Street a little bit. There was a small team track behind Yops, and they could back their banana cars or coal cars in behind these buildings. Okay. That's the same street today. There's the Carson Center, and this is still parking for the Carson Center. And that's the 1st Street. This was Paducah Iron at one time. Then it was Paper Supply. They supplied paper all over West Kentucky. And it was a real big operation. And, okay. There's where it is today. That's the back end of the Carson Center. This is the back entrance to the Carson Center. Paper Supply, Paducah Iron Early. And there's the lights. Let us not forget, please don't tear me down. They had that sign on the thing for you. They, you know, everybody thought they ought to save it, but Ford River Center, they had to have it. And that's the back of some of the produce centers. That was a railroad siding there. They could unload railroad cars in the back of those produce houses. Thank you for coming. Brought back some memories to some of those.